Welcome to Realist Watch Reviews. In this video, I will be introducing you to the new Timex Q GMT and comparing it to the reissue from 2019. As usual, I'll give the GMT a full review and tell you what I like and dislike about the watch. Q GMT is about $40 more than the reissue from 2019. So is it worth it? Well, just to summarize, what are the differences between the two? Of course, you've got a totally different dial with the framed indices and polished seconds hand and the addition of the GMT hand. You've also got just a date window instead of a day date like the reissue. You've got a different type of a bezel insert and of course a totally different movement. The case is the same. The bracelets, as we talked about, are completely different. This new one does also have the quick release. The battery hatch and case back are all the same also. And a couple of other differences to note. The signed crown on the Q GMT and the ring under the bezel is now color matched in silver to the case, which looks a lot nicer. The dial is 38 millimeters. The lug to lug is 44.5. The lug width is 18 millimeters at the case, and the bracelet flares out to 22 millimeters and then back down to 18 millimeters at the clasp. And there you can see the clasp is signed with the Timex logo. The thickness is just 11.8 millimeters. And the weight is 110 grams, sized for my 6.5-inch wrists. It comes with a lovely domed acrylic crystal. There's really nothing like acrylic for that vintage look and feel. I always appreciate a good acrylic crystal, and this one is really nicely executed and with that classic distortion when viewing the dial from angles. Now this is the black and blue bezel, which is also known as the Batman version, as opposed to the more popular Pepsi variant. The colors on the bezel are noteworthy. The blue almost has a teal type of a finish in some lighting conditions. I think the tone they used here looks really nice, and the black is also nice and dark, and the printing in silver is crisp and clear. Now, when I first received this watch, the bezel was really stiff, and I haven't used it that much at all in the last few weeks of wearing this, but somehow it is now turning very easily, similar to the reissue. Now, I'm not sure what happened here, guys. I don't know if I damaged it. I don't remember bumping my wrist or bumping the bezel. Now, I have seen other reviews which say the bezel is very stiff, so I would expect that mine is perhaps suffering from a quality issue. The dial color is a nice deep inky black. It's one of the surprising elements of this watch, as you don't normally get this type of a nice inky black finish on cheaper watches. The indices are applied with a nicely polished silver surround, and the date cutout at 3 o'clock is also nicely framed in white. There is a minute tracker printed in white, and the text is all printed in the same color. The details of the dial are really well executed. The handset is all polished, and the GMT hand has a nice blue colored arrow to match the bezel, and the Pepsi variant of course has the red colored arrow. Below the 6 o'clock it says Swiss movement, so now let's take a look at that movement in action. The push-pull crown is signed with that nice Timex Q logo, and in operation the first click after you push it out lets you adjust the date in one direction and lets you adjust the GMT hand in the other direction. And pulling it out, of course, all the way allows you to adjust the time. Now on this model, the seconds hand actually does hit all of the markers on the minute tracker, which is always nice to see on a quartz. The case finishing is good, not great on this guy. It is the same case as the previous reissue. The whole case is polished except for these angled surfaces just above the lugs. The polishing on top of the case is one area where I really wished that Timex had brushed the case to give it a more sporty appearance. It also attracts a lot of smudges. Now the lugs contain this 18mm bracelet, which as I said flares out to 22mm. Now the bracelet does have solid links, and the links have a brushed finish on the larger section, and the center two sections are polished. These links are held together by split pins, and the bracelet was fairly easy to size. Just for reference, here is what the individual links look like. As you can see, the first link does have some decent amount of articulation. This is something that I always check for in bracelets. The articulation between the links, however, is not as good. As you can see, I'm trying to articulate the links so that they fold on top of each other, and I am unable to do that. The bracelet does feel nice and smooth on the back side of the links, and on the sides there are no sharp surfaces. This does mean that it feels comfortable on the wrist. However, there are no half links, and of course there are no micro adjustments on this clasp, so I was unable to get a good fit. This clasp is essentially functions like a butterfly clasp in that it is low profile and slim, but this type of clasp is really more suited for dress watches, and I really wished Timex would have used a clasp that provided more micro adjustments for this sportier watch. And going back to the 18mm lug width here, this is a subjective thing, but it's one of the least favorite parts of this watch. When I'm wearing this watch and I look down on my wrists, I do always see the 18mm half link there, and I can see a bit of a gap between the bracelet and the case, and also a gap between the case and the 22mm section of the bracelet. It just doesn't look like a very clean integration of the bracelet into the case. And I also do wish the design of the bracelet was a bit different. These polished sections, for example, they look a little bit large in comparison or in proportion to this smaller case size of this watch. I actually did prefer the look of the reissue from 2019. The look of the bracelet was nice, but of course it was a much cheaper construction, which was one of the more criticized parts of that watch. Now, to address this bracelet fitment issue, I did throw this guy on one of my cheap AliExpress clasps, and I'll throw that on right now on the bracelet and come back and show you guys how this fits on my 6.5-inch wrists. As I mentioned, here is the watch on the AliExpress clasp with micro adjustments, and I'll put that on my 6.5-inch wrist for a wrist shot. And by the way, I'll include a link to the strap in case you're interested. But there you see the watch on my 6.5-inch wrist. Now the watch wears really well due to its size and weight. It's comfortable, it's light, it's not too thick. And with this clasp, I was able to get a perfect fit. And it does have a couple of issues on this clasp. Just so you're aware, now this is an 18mm clasp, and Timex uses 17mm clasp, and essentially there's a little bit of a gap between the clasp and the last link on the bracelet, and this is the case on both sides. So if you can find a 17mm clasp, that would be ideal. And just for reference, here is the Timex one that I removed. Seems nice quality, no issues with it except that it doesn't provide micro adjustments. And just for reference, here is the exact measurement for anybody looking for a replacement. So 17 millimeters on both sides. Let's get this side. Yeah, 17 millimeters on both sides. One thing I didn't include on the list was the loom, because unfortunately Timex did not make an improvement to the loom. But just for reference and for your reviewing pleasure, I will leave you with a loom shot. If you found this review helpful, guys, please do like and subscribe. And here it is. Again, the loom is similar. It will fade in a couple of minutes, which is disappointing. The indices are actually a little bit smaller on the Q GMT. And actually the handset even seems to have more loom on the reissue from 2019. So loom department disappointing, but otherwise I would highly recommend the Q GMT. Alright guys, I'll leave it at that. Thank you for watching.